Almost exactly 3 years ago, I sat on this couch and explained to my phone why I was using a digital pocket studio to do my multi-track recording instead of embracing the now and just like using a computer and a DAW. A lot has changed in the ensuing 3 years, including that my channel has grown largely on the back of that video that I expected basically no one to watch. Turns out there are some other people in the world who have struggled to have satisfying experiences recording with a DAW and who are leaning toward or have already embraced DAWless recording. And if you're one of those people, this video is for you. Because something else has changed in the 3 years since making that original My Recording Rig video, and that is my recording rig. I've gone from using this digital pocket studio from Tascam, weirdly back to using one of these, then to a bigger digital Portastudio also made by Tascam, then, much to the chagrin of my bank account, to a Tascam 424 Mark II, and finally, as of yesterday afternoon, to the Tascam Model 12. That's a lot of different devices. All of them have advantages and disadvantages. And in this video, I want to share my experience with those devices with the hope that maybe you can learn something and better inform your search for the perfect DAWless device. To properly explain how I got from here to here, I feel like I really have to start over here. I did my earliest recording on a Play School toy cassette player recorder that was just like this device in all of the ways that matter. It had extraordinarily simple controls, one speaker, one microphone, and it recorded to, wait, how's this open? To cassette. You put a cassette in there and you record, voila. I loved recording to a device like this because it was extraordinarily simple, intuitive. It didn't get in the way of what I was really trying to do, which is to write and then perform music. How could it get in the way when all you can do is put a tape in, hit record, play the thing, hit stop, rewind, listen back, and either keep it or record over it? For sheer simplicity, for ease of use, it's hard to beat a device like this, but of course, you can, because this thing is like 40 years old and there's something that works just like it right there. I'm not pointing at you, at your skull, I'm pointing at the iPhone that I'm using to record this video. The Voice Memos app on the iPhone works almost exactly like this in all of the ways that matter. And if you're looking for an entry point into DAWless recording, that is it. If you're just gonna be playing an acoustic, I mean like in the physical space type instrument, or singing something like a Voice Memos app, the digital equivalent of this is perfect. But my aspiration was not only to sit with an acoustic guitar and sing one of my songs into an iPhone. I had dreams of being a one-man band, of getting into multi-track recording. And that's what led me to the Tascam DP-006. This is the smallest and least expensive in Tascam's line of digital Portastudios, and they call it a pocket studio because it is so small. It runs on batteries. And in this tiny plastic box, you get the core features you need to do multi-track recording. You've got built-in microphones and quarter-inch inputs for actually capturing sound inside of this. You've got preamps of some kind. Tascam calls this a 6-track device because the last 2 tracks are actually stereo tracks, but in practice, I found it much easier to think of this as really only a 4-track device. But you can do a lot with 4/6 tracks, especially when you consider that this gives you the ability to perform bounces or little internal mix downs of the tracks that you've recorded separately so that they're combined onto a much smaller number of tracks. Once you've combined sounds, you can take the others and clear them and do more recording on those tracks. And that means that in theory, at least, you could record an infinite number of tracks using this device. Now, it's important to point out that some of what makes this device so convenient, so easy to use, is the fact that it is a digital device. The digital nature allows you to do the limitless tracking and bouncing that I talked about a moment ago. It also gives you access to features like an undo or redo function, or allows you to like really quickly skip to the beginning and end of recorded sections. It's easy to take those features for granted because we live in a digital world, and everything from Microsoft Word to GarageBand to Pro Tools have an undo feature. And though I didn't appreciate it at the time, those digital features were an important part of what made this device so easy and intuitive for me to use. There are between 15 and 20 songs out there in the various digital domains that I recorded using only this device. And some of them, like my single Long Goodbye, I think actually sound surprisingly surprisingly good, given that it was produced entirely within a teeny tiny plastic box.
And when you say forever, it sounds like goodbye.
In a way, that is the dream of DAWless recording, right? That you can use something that's very simple, very intuitive to record something that realizes your creative vision. But I found that as I did more recording, my creative vision seemed to expand, and eventually I found myself wanting some features that just weren't available in this device. That led me briefly back to something like this, because I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to just sort of like saturate all the sounds that I record using the built-in compression and equalization and mojo of something like this. Turns out that didn't play that nice with this, and this was actually a lot harder to use for multi-track recording than this. I've actually got a video about that as well. So I let go of this dream pretty quickly, but soon turned my attention to this, the Tascam DP-03SD. It says SD just because it uses an SD card to create contrast with some earlier digital Portastudios, but what it really is sort of like a big brother of this little guy. And some of the differences between these two devices should be obvious. The first is just that this one is bigger, and I kind of have big hands and fat fingers, and that's something that is not inconsequential to me. But then even more noticeable probably is that this has a bunch of sliders, where this only had 4 little knobs to control 4/6 tracks. This has 8 different sliders to control 8 independent mono tracks. And then here's the master fader as well. That's the real feature upgrade that I was seeking when I bought this device. And the DP-03 has some other features that I thought I might use, like a reverb control, some built-in EQ, and even like a mastering tool. It's got built-in microphones, and of course it's got inputs, but whereas the DP-06 only had 1/4" ends, this has got XLR ends, and it's got a line out, which makes this a little bit easier to use with external monitors or to do external bouncing, whatever. I guess in the end, I thought of this as a slightly more powerful version of the DP-006, and I thought that the handful of extra features, again, mostly tracks, were gonna make this a worthwhile investment. And I will say that I have enjoyed using this device. I've used it on a lot of recording, and in general, I've had very positive experiences. But in the end, I think this was too similar to the DP-006 to have been a really meaningful upgrade. I've tried to make use of the built-in reverb and mastering suite, and I just haven't been that impressed with them. And I have used the built-in EQ some, but it's kind of hard to use because you have to use like a sub-menu and then these little twiddles to adjust the EQ on each of the independent tracks. And in practice, that's just not that convenient. And it's worth noting that I actually wasn't as happy having 4 extra mono tracks as I thought I would be, because remember how I said that this has kind of got 4/6 tracks? Well, it turns out that the stereo tracks that are on the DP-006, they are very, very intuitive to use, especially if you're doing stereo bounces inside of this device. You can do a stereo bounce of 4 things that you've recorded, put it on only one of these, and then use the level and panning to control that bounce with everything in its proper place. If you want to do a similar stereo bounce on this device, you have to bounce to 2 independent mono tracks, because that's what stereo is. It's 2 mono tracks that are sort of like panned in opposite directions. And then you have to match these levels exactly with the faders in order for it to maintain the right spread, the right balance of sounds. That's a pain, and when you're off in really small ways, they can still be frustrating and throw off the feel of your mix. And it's just one more thing that you have to think about, and that I took for granted in this device. And this comparison is not the only one that made me think less of the DP-03SD. The device that really killed this is this. I had a Tascam 424 Mark I, the original version, years ago. I bought this Mark II version about 6 months after buying the DP-03SD. I did it because I was on a real cassette kick. I had been doing a lot of experimentation with cassettes. I had been listening to a lot of commercial cassettes for fun. I thought, this is gonna be relatively easy. I know how this thing works. I know what DAWless recording is like. I'm just gonna port it over to this and get to take advantage of all the extra features that are built into this and all the cassette mojo that I could ever want. As some of you can probably already guess, it wasn't quite that easy. This device is quite a bit more finicky than one of these digital Portastudios. It also requires maintenance, including simple things like just cleaning the tape heads. It's something that you have to remember, and that I didn't have to remember when I was using the digital devices. But the main frustration wasn't cleaning the heads. It wasn't finding Type 2 tapes. It was the fact that this is a real analog 4-track multi-tracker. Remember when I talked about this digital version and the fact that I could record to all 4 tracks and then bounce all 4 of them down to one of the remaining tracks? And now that was a magical digital feature. Well, when you're using a cassette multi-tracker, you can record to all 4 tracks, But if you want to do a bounce, where are you supposed to bounce to? Let's say I did record onto all 4 tracks and then tried to bounce onto track 4. You would get the results of tracks 1, 2, and 3, but you would not get what you had recorded to track 4. Because using analog gear, using tape, you cannot record to and play back this track at the exact same time. So, in order to perform internal bounces on this device, you always have to have 1 track available to receive a bounce. And that's if you want to bounce into mono. If you want to bounce into stereo, you have to have 2 tracks available. This means that if you're recording and bouncing in mono, the most you could ever record before bouncing is 3 tracks. And then you could bounce onto track 4. Well, then you can do more recording, right? Yes, but also no. Because if you want to perform further bounces, you always have to have 1 track open. This track is already full. You want to keep what's on this. So really you could only, of these 3 remaining tracks, record to 2 more of them before performing another bounce to this empty track. In this way, the 424 gave me fewer independent tracks than I was expecting because I went into it expecting it to be like this. And it's not. You can, in theory, do an infinite number of tracks on this, but it is much more difficult than on a little device like this one. It turns out it was difficult for me to live with the track limitations of this device. I did try to use it. I haven't released anything that was recorded exclusively on this device because the sessions for this old EP sort of fell apart. But I said earlier that using this device kind of made me less interested in using this device. And if this device has major limitations, why did it make me not want to use this one? These were released in the 80s and 90s, even I think the very early 2000s, and designed to be a home recording person's entryway into legitimate recording. It wasn't supposed to be an all-in-one box that had everything you would possibly want to use. It was supposed to be the beginning of building a recording studio. And if you wanted to buy microphones, outboard gear, whatever it is that you needed to do more and more sophisticated recording, the idea was that you could continue to use this device as a hub. So it's got things like multiple inputs and outputs. It's got effect sends. It's got controls that allow you to separate what comes out of the mains from what comes out of your headphones or whatever else you're using for monitoring. And every one of those is a feature that you do not have available in one of these digital Portastudios. And now my child is awake from his nap. Come sit right here.
I got those 2 things.
You have 2 things. Are you going to plug it in? You going to plug it in? Where's the plug go? Okay, while he plays with that, I'm going to try to finish my thought. The reason why the 424 defeated this is because all those extra features on the 424, like all of the extra outputs and inputs, all of the different controls, the ability to use it as a hub for a much bigger system, that's precisely what you can't do with this device. And the truth is, there are other things that I wanted to be able to integrate into my rig, like an external EQ, an external reverb device, maybe a compressor. Not to mention that the 424 over there actually has...
Plug it in.
Oh yeah, you should plug it in. Not to mention the 424 has things like individual external knobs for controlling the EQ. And that's something I'd like to be able to do, is just easily tweak the EQ of tracks as I go along. Not easy to do in this device. So ultimately, I found myself wanting some of the basic digital features that I was used to from using digital Portastudios like this, and some of the extra connectivity and just like physical features, I guess, that had been built into the old 424s. And all that ultimately has led me to the Tascam Model 12. I haven't opened it yet, but I've watched a bunch of videos on YouTube, including some by a channel I really trust, 424 Recording. He said that he thought that this was basically the modern, fully featured digital equivalent of an old 424. And from watching other videos, I do think that that's probably the case. And that's why I just spent $600 on this yesterday, even though I'm sitting in a room with 4 other DAWless recording devices. I feel like I have a problem. Some of these are probably going to get sold if I find that I like the Tascam Model 12. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's all I have to say about my history, I guess, with these devices. I hope it taught you something about the things that are available in the marketplace, both used and new, and maybe about some of the features that you were or weren't thinking about in searching for your ideal DAWless device. Let me know what you think in the comments. I hope you're doing well. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you around.